Welcome back, Proximians, to Terra Proxima. Last episode we were lucky enough to get to brag about ourselves for 15 minutes, but since this series is still about Earth, at its core we will sadly also have to talk about their feeble existence. There's a reason why those dumb idiots managed to get themselves killed in the end, even though they themselves might say it was intended by nature. They definitely had the technology available to stop an asteroid of this magnitude. Don't let them tell you otherwise. Oh wait, they can't tell you otherwise because they're fucking dead. Enough shitfuckery, let's get straight to business by talking about human struggles. We've got a long list to go through, so time to start with the thing that would have probably killed them in 100 years if it wasn't for Chicxulub 2. Climate change is a topic humans probably wouldn't have liked an alien civilization to talk about, because they're simply so regretful of the stupid decisions they made in the past. You see, before humans realized climate change could actually kill them all, they were spouting carbon dioxide in the air like it's nobody's business. From the moment 300 years before their existence, when they invented steam trains and factories, everything went downhill. They then invented electricity, found great and healthy ways to generate that, and they even invented cars that run on precious materials they found inside their planet. Long story short, they realized the problem, but it was already too late. Except it wasn't too late, because the powerful people who could actually do something about it just didn't feel like doing it. While the larger majority of the population was angry at those powerful people, standing in protest over their terrible actions, they probably should have been protesting against the space rock heading straight for them. The space rock probably wouldn't have listened either. But what exactly is so terrible about CO2, carbon dioxide? We don't see this as an issue because we don't use it, and it doesn't cause issues for our atmosphere. And that's exactly the issue. Before there were any living things on Earth, the atmosphere was full of CO2, which caused tons of natural disasters, but nobody really noticed. The living creatures that came after turned that CO2 into O2, breathable by humans. This was perfect and well until humans figured out millions of years ago they could put some of that CO2 back. Why? Because it turns out CO2 is produced when burning fuels, something they extensively used for their new inventions at the time. They didn't care, however, and filled the atmosphere with CO2, ruining it together with the ozone layer, balance of radiation, and every climate on the planet. The temperature was so off the charts in some areas. This giant block of ice they called Antarctica was starting to melt. The temperatures were also off the charts in the other direction in some areas, freezing colds, intense heat, and natural disasters. I think you may now start to understand why this probably would have ended their civilization in a matter of time. In the beginning there were fists, then there were tools, after that humans invented swords, bows and shields, then they invented guns, tasers and bombs, and then they discovered nuclear fusion and the Earth was never the same again. Humanity as a civilization always got slowed down because part of the global focus had to go to keeping and healing connections between the different nations. If the leaders of one of the countries didn't agree with the leaders of another country, they'd go and talk nonsense about it for a bit, while not really doing anything worth their time. If that didn't work out and they were still acting like toddlers fighting over pencils, they would instead resort to declaring war on each other, because nothing solves the dispute better than to simply eliminate the opponent and never mention it again, right? Right, guys? Anyways, this is what the humans did for decennia, until only after 2 world wars had taken place, the last of which ended with a city being hit by a nuclear bomb, they decided to form an alliance. This alliance was meant to keep peace between all the powers of the world. At that moment, all nations paused their warfare, signed a contract saying they wouldn't go to war with each other, and proceeded to declare war on each other literally right after. It's fascinating how humans think sometimes. The problem lies in the evolution of governments. If one government or leader signs a treaty promising they won't nuke every fucking person alive, that doesn't mean the next government or leader will think the same way. Maybe they don't give a flying shit about the treaty and decide to instead exterminate a suppressed minority by poisoning them in concentration camps. The point is that governments change all the time and you never know what the next one is going to do. Maybe that's why having your entire government switch from progressive to conservative every 4 years isn't so ideal. Back to what I was actually supposed to talk about: nuclear warfare. Basically, it is the principle of using nuclear weapons that create a massive explosion of fire and energy upon collision using nuclear fission or fission in war. The international superpowers decided they wanted to be ready at all times to end the world with a single button, so they ordered the creation and storage of thousands of nuclear bombs. One of those could destroy a city. Thousands of them could destroy all of mankind. Humans, however, were too late to find out if it would ever come to that. Third time's the charm is what they say, right? You probably shouldn't mention that in this episode because every fucking part of it is terrible. We're listing human struggles after all. If you asked a rich human if poverty was something they worried about on a daily basis, they'd probably laugh at you, say no, and drive away in a $200,000 car. The point is that poverty in the world was something overshadowed by the other problems I've already mentioned. People preferred fighting for equal rights, peace, and climate change over poverty. What humans at the time, most of them at least, didn't realize was that poverty was the foundation of each of these problems. They could have all fought for climate change and actually achieved things to better its consequences if they had more intelligent people doing research and ruling the countries. Just think of how many intelligent men, how many intelligent women, how many groundbreaking ideas could have been lost because those men or women were too poor to have a voice and their ideas never saw the light of day. It's a shame that poverty wasn't put at the top of the agenda every day. I believe that if they fixed that issue first, the other problems would tackle themselves like a domino effect. If any of you think I make fixing these issues sound easy, you're getting the wrong idea. Resolving these inconsistencies in a society takes effort and funding. That effort and funding has to come from a motivated government, as well as citizens ready to help when necessary and pay more taxes to fund projects. There will always be a minority contesting against these expensive projects. They'll be arguing that investing money in solving other people's issues doesn't fix any of their unrelated, unproblematic troubles. But the only way we can get everyone on board is by clearly showing off how everyone is benefiting from these changes. Humans wanted to reproduce. They're just animals after all. Unlike most other animals, however, they stayed together with one person for most of their life and had children with that one person. This is natural evolution for any intelligent species, like the humans and the Proximians. However, if too many couples make too many children, the reasons for which we'll cover later, there will be too many people on the planet. There are not infinite resources, not on any planet, so even if you owned the entire universe and you filled it up with living species eating up its resources, you'd still run out after a while. We can only prolong this devastating ending by colonizing more and more land to put more and more people on. Humans realized this pretty early on, and it worked out for them in the beginning. When there were only a few small tribes, those tribes quickly ran out of space and resources for all their members. So, they increased their land size and hunting area, or they split up into smaller groups. This meant they continuously spread out over the planet, until they reached a limit the world could handle, and they realized they were too late to do anything about it. Realizing that massive issues are at hand when it's already too late seems to be a trend for humanity. Before we get into the details of how they even tried to combat this and what the effects were, we need to talk about why they even had children in the first place. In most countries, having more children meant getting more money from the government to pay for those children's needs. Not all governments did this though. This could be seen as an easy way to gain some income, but then you realize you do actually need to use that money to feed the children, and the government probably doesn't give you enough, so you have to add in some of your own income. A second possible reason is the indirect positive effects a child could have. Maybe this child will invent a cure for a disease and become the richest man alive, indirectly helping you when you're in monetary need. If you're a bit more into slavery, you could even use the child to work for you. You could then harvest its work for money, of which the child itself gets absolutely nothing. Sounds like easy money, definitely if you want to be thrown in jail. Exploiting children for their work was illegal and still is in Terra Proxima. A final third reason is that children simply make life worth living. Sure, they can also bring fear, disgust, anger, and death with them, but those cons are heavily overshadowed by the overwhelming amount of pros. Children can bring joy when they smile or laugh, they can give you hugs, kisses, and presents. They're your friends, they want the best for you and they care for you. They want to make you proud, and all of this, of course, only applies to you if you raise the fuckers properly, which a lot of humans fail to do for some reason. But with a little bit of effort and investment, you'll get so much out of it. So that's why having children could benefit you in a bunch of ways. But what did humans try and do to combat the inevitable downfall due to overpopulation? They would have colonized other planets if they had time before they were snapped out of existence, and maybe they would have even lived where we live today. Some countries installed strict policies to limit parents on how many children they could have. This, however, goes against all rights of living beings, but without calling any names, it's safe to say that the countries who installed these rules weren't that great at controlling countries. So despite these rules, people still had more children. Maybe there were some illegals in there, but they were still children and they still needed to be fed. A first failed experiment. If you insist on adding a rule that goes against human rights, you best be ready to have it slapped right back into your face. Buildings grew taller, more beautiful land was destroyed, and living conditions became more terrible by the years. It seemed like humans were doomed to end themselves in only a matter of time. It's like a show ending on a cliffhanger for the next episode, but the next episode never comes out because the broadcasting station was hit by a fucking space rock. Now for the effects, and they're dreadful. More humans meant less food per human, meant higher prices for that food, meant more poverty, meant less workforce, meant less production, meant less food. You get the gist. It was a never-ending spiral of rising prices and poverty they unsuccessfully tried to crawl out of. The final struggle we'll discuss today is the human health crisis. Explaining what caused this issue is difficult, but it goes back to most of the issues I've discussed before. A shortage of food and other products meant a drop in quality and access to those foods. This in turn meant that humans were eating less healthy food because it was pretty expensive, and they were losing access to healthcare because it was too expensive or the government wasn't keen on paying for it. This is why humans got fatter and fatter, which also wasn't good for their health, and they got sicker and sicker as caused by a lack of healthcare. All of this ties in neatly with the other human struggles. If there are less healthy people, there are less people to work, which causes a ton of its own issues. If the people get less fit and more fat, they are unable to do the dirty work that must be done. It all works together in a beautiful circle balance. In conclusion, was humanity a failure due to all of these issues? No, that's a far stretch and a troubling conclusion to take. Should humans have just used robots to do all the work while they could sit back, relax, or even enter a simulation where they are all healthy? No, definitely not. A good society is one where everyone actively works together to achieve greatness for both the society and the individual person. Humans made a pretty cool trilogy about this terrible proposal and its effect. You should watch it, they sent it with them in the pod.